Let's talk about Under the Waves. This is a new narrative adventure that was developed by Parallel Studio and produced by Quantic Dream, the minds behind Detroit Become Human and Heavy Rain. When you think of the term narrative adventure, you're probably going to assume that it's a walking simulator. No one would blame you because most of these titles are associated with you just walking half the time. But in the case of Under the Waves, you would be partially correct. Walking generally occurs when the day begins and ends in certain narrative scenes. For the most part, you're exploring this fairly sizable underwater area that so happens to be controlled by a massive corporation that you work for. You assume the role of Stan. He's a troubled individual who has volunteered to man an isolated station for this corporation and is tasked with maintaining the different substations that are next to the primary drilling platform. You start out with getting tasked into a routine. You're going to make coffee, acquire tasks from the computers, request approval from Tim, who happens to be your boss, and then set out to complete those daily tasks. These are going to include things like fixing communication towers, beacon retrieval, maintaining the O2 stations, and more. Once these tasks are complete, you are then free to explore. As mentioned earlier, the area you explore in Under the Waves is fairly large, but luckily, you have Moon, an underwater craft that will be your go-to method of transportation as you explore. Moon is surprisingly nimble, and you're going to find yourself jetting in and out of tight spaces with ease. I think the only issue I had was going straight down. To do so, you actually have to strafe, and then you just press down. You'll go down very slowly, and even though you want to have a little bit more speed, because in this game, there's a number of moments where you're trying to go down quickly, and it just feels like Moon is going to take far too much damage in these instances, but for the most part, zipping around the massive areas in Under the Waves is enjoyable and a relatively smooth experience. As you move about, you'll notice that the mini-map is littered with things for you to find, explore, and collect. There are wrecked crafts to explore for resources and collectibles, upgrade chests that will contain blueprints for you to unlock at various crafting stations. Almost everywhere you look, there are resources for you to collect so that you're prepared for long runs. Crafting isn't complex, but it's a necessary feature as you progress. And honestly, I didn't have any expectations when it came to gameplay because I thought that this would just be another narrative adventure filled with dialogue choices, decision paths, and QuickTime events. In fact, there are no dialogue choices. QTEs are kept at a minimal and decision paths are practically non-existent, which means this game's writing has to carry it, and for the most part, it does. Under the Waves deals with themes of trauma, bereavement, isolation, and guilt. The main plot centers around Stan and his inner conflict. It also has subplots that deal with environmental conservation and corporate greed. But as you're progressing through the game, you're going to come to understand why Stan prefers to be isolated and why he's unable to let go of his grief. As he is isolated, he is constantly having conversations with himself, and these monologues do a great job of showing how tortured Stan is. It doesn't mean that this game is completely bereft of humor. Those moments do exist, but bear in mind that they are rare. While there are no other humans to interact with in-game, Stan does have people he checks in with. Conversations with Tim provide further background about Stan and the corporation they work for. These two know each other well, and there's a familiar feel to the interactions. I enjoy listening to their banter as Tim doesn't come off as overbearing. He is a man who is serious about his work, but does care about Stan's well-being. The other source of a human interaction for Stan is his estranged wife, Emma. Their interactions are tense, and rightfully so, but some of the conversations can feel a bit melodramatic and forced. Regardless, the dialogue in Under the Waves is well written and well delivered. The voice actor for Stan absolutely nails it when he starts to question his decisions and everything around him. He is easy to both empathize with and be frustrated by. Now let me just say that I don't believe this game would be effective narratively if its setting wasn't perfect. The developers nail the feeling of isolation as everything around you feels foreign and alien. Whenever the story takes you to one of the various facilities, you feel uncomfortable. These areas are noticeably devoid of life, filled with heavy machinery and drones conducting their various duties. In these instances, you really feel as if you've creeped into the survival horror genre. It doesn't help when your oxygen is slowly decreasing and the lights of the facilities flicker on and off. The ocean floor can also feel unsettling, especially in moments when you're making your way back to the life pod after a long mission. I enjoyed these moments the most though, because traveling from these areas were usually paired with a monologue or conversation between Stan and Tim, and these moments can really drive home just how desperately alone Stan is. It also helps that the music in this game is fantastic. While my time with Under the Waves was very good, it does have its issues. There are a number of technical problems, especially when you're swimming and trying to interact with objects. Just being outside of Moon, honestly, at times can feel really clunky. Sometimes when you're trying to interact with certain objects, likely looking at a switch that you want to flip or an upgrade chest or whatever, Stan just kind of quickly flips his body toward it, and it's unintentionally hilarious when you see it because it's completely unexpected. I just want to say that I don't have a problem with the way Stan looks. In my head, I always think that he looks like the sailor from Dredge at the very beginning, but I will say that his eye movement is hilarious at times. Also, the lip sync for English is completely off, and it really did force me at times to adjust the camera so I didn't have to see him talk. I was literally laughing in the opening scene because I thought my audio was off, but really it's just the lip sync was so bad. I just kept flipping through the different camera angles to make sure that I didn't have to see him talk. I felt that exploration is solid, and I've said this before, but it's one of those things where you actually don't have to engage with it at all. And I find that to be frustrating because exploration in this game is pretty good. And there are upgrades that will make your time in Under the Waves easier, but the game is just not difficult. Puzzles are fairly simple, they're all executed well, and resources are plentiful, but unless you turn off the HUD completely, you should never see a game over screen. I just feel like exploration, as important as it is in this game, should have probably been emphasized just a bit more. I also feel like there should have been more interactions with Emma. She's a focal point of Stan's story, and is an individual who clearly means a lot to him, and he does care about what she thinks, but those moments where you're actually conversing with Emma are scarce. You're going to notice that near the end, there's a moment where it feels like it was forced for emotional impact, but because of the limited time with her, it doesn't really come across effectively. I just liked having the fact that Emma was a no-nonsense person in Stan's ear and was clearly trying to get him to see reason. And for me, I just can't understand why there just weren't more interactions with her. I feel like that was a real missed opportunity. Another nitpick that I have is that the routine missions in this game lack variety and impact. There's honestly no reason to do them unless you're trying to 100% the game. They're essentially fetch quests and taking pictures of the various wildlife, and I found myself sticking to the story mission because those were more impactful and I didn't want to interrupt the pace. The game will roughly run you around 4 to 6 hours if you just stick to the story. I think it's going to be around 10 if you try to do everything, but just running the story is going to get you taken around the map, and you're probably going to see everything you need to see. It's just unfortunate that more care wasn't given to side quest, but I think in a narrative adventure, that's fine. I will say that I didn't notice the lack of dialogue choices because the writing is strong, but I do question the lack of decision paths. Hear me out. Mainly, I feel like there were potentially impactful moments left on the table if you were able to make decisions in certain areas. There are missions that feel like there could have been a decision path or two thrown in to help drive home certain decisions, but beyond that minor gripe, I think what's here is good. The decision path that is in the game, though, will really pull at your heartstrings. It's really well done because by that time, you'll know what Stan needs to do, even though you can clearly hear in his delivery that what you need to do is going to tear him apart. Overall, Under the Waves is solid, and I recommend it for anyone who's a fan of the narrative genre. If you like narrative adventures, this one is definitely worth picking up. It having more gameplay than most narrative adventures is a welcome surprise, even though it does come at the cost of those genre staples. Like I said, there's no real dialogue choices. There's like one decision path, but I think the writing is really strong in this game. Technical issues and visual hiccups aside, this is definitely a game that I think is worth checking out. Solid narrative, good pacing. I really do like the visual style, even though Stan does kind of look goofy a little bit. But beyond that, though, I think this game is overall one of the bigger surprises of the year. I don't think anyone was really anticipating it when it was initially announced. I remember the trailer kind of being underwhelming, even though people saw Quantic Dream and more than likely thought, well, look, we might get one of their smaller stories. I thought to myself that maybe, just maybe, it could be good. And honestly, I'm glad I picked up the game because I almost dismissed it outright. I saw that it was coming out and I just looked at it and said, it's probably not going to be for me. But this game, well worth the $30. And that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. If you happen to play Under the Waves, let me know how you feel about the game below. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.